Mark Hutten, and welcome to today's show. If you have a question about autism spectrum disorders, please send it in via email right now. My email address is mbhutton@gmail.com, mbhutton@gmail.com. We're looking for your questions now. Now, while we're waiting for the questions to come in, I briefly want to talk to those parents who have recently discovered that their child has Asperger's or high-functioning autism. Oftentimes, parents realize that there's something wrong with their child, but they're not really sure what it is. And at some point, they get an assessment done, and the professional says, well, I've come to the conclusion that your child has Asperger's or high-functioning autism. And usually parents are either semi-shocked or they're relieved to know that there's a name attached to their child's behavior. So in any event, regardless of your response to discovering that your child has this diagnosis, we're going to talk briefly about some things that you can expect. There are basically 6 areas of difficulty associated with Asperger's, and you'll need to consider all of these, and we'll look at each one in turn here. Sensory sensitivities. Many Asperger's children have sensory issues. These can occur in one or all of the senses, including sight, sound, smell, touch, and taste. The degree of difficulty varies from one child to the next. Most frequently, the child will perceive ordinary sensations as quite intense, or may even be underreactive to a sensation. Often, the challenge in this area will be to determine if the child's response to a sensation is actually a sensory reaction or if it is a learned behavior driven mainly by rigidity and anxiety. Cognitive issues. Mind blindness, or the inability to make inferences about what another person is thinking, is a core challenge for those with Asperger's. Because of mind blindness, the child may have difficulty empathizing with others and will often say what he thinks without considering the other person's feelings. The child will often assume that everyone is thinking the same thing that he is. For the Asperger's child, the world exists not in shades of gray, but only in black and white. This rigidity in thought, or lack of cognitive flexibility, interferes with problem-solving, mental planning, impulse control, flexibility in thoughts and actions, and the ability to stay focused on a task until completion. The rigidity also makes it difficult for an Asperger's child to engage in imaginative play. His interest in play materials, themes, and choices will be narrow, and he will attempt to control the play situation. Motor clumsiness. Many children with Asperger's have difficulty with both gross and fine motor skills. The difficulty is often not just the task itself, but the motor planning involved in completing the task. Typical difficulties include handwriting, riding a bike, and playing different ball games, for example, baseball, kickball, basketball, and so on. Another characteristic of Asperger's children that parents need to be aware of is that these children have a narrow range of interest and also an insistence on set routines. Due to the Asperger's child's anxiety, his interactions will be ruled by rigidity and obsessions that transitions and changes can cause. Generally, he will have few interests, but those interests will often dominate. The need for structure and routine will be most important. Your child may develop his own rules to live by that barely coincide with the rest of society's rules. Impairment in language skills. Children with Asperger's have very specific problems with language, especially with pragmatic use of language, which is the social aspect. Asperger's kids see language as a way to share facts and information, and not so much as a way to share thoughts, feelings, and emotions. The child will display difficulty in many areas of a conversation, for example, processing verbal information, initiation, maintenance, ending a conversation, topic appropriateness, sustaining attention during the conversation, and taking turns in a conversation. Conversations may often appear scripted or ritualistic. In other words, it's almost as if the child is using dialogue from a TV show or a movie. They may also have difficulty problem-solving, analyzing, or synthesizing information and understanding language beyond the literal level. And the last characteristic we'll look at is difficulty with reciprocal social interactions. Children with Asperger's display varying difficulties with interacting with others. Some of these children have no desire to interact, while others simply don't know how. More specifically, they don't comprehend the give and take nature of social interactions. For example, they may want to lecture you about Civil War facts or about the history of the Titanic, or they may leave the room in the midst of playing with another child. Some of these children don't comprehend the verbal and nonverbal cues used to further the understanding between two people in a typical social interaction. These include eye contact, facial expressions, body language, conversational turn-taking, perspective-taking, and matching conversational and nonverbal responses to the interaction. Now, we interviewed some parents with a recently diagnosed child, and here's what they have to say.
The year before we diagnosed, there was increasing amounts of tension because we didn't know what to do.
I mean, he has an absolute fiasco about him trying on shoes, you know, because he won't, he used to get really upset, he'd start crying, he wouldn't try a shoe on, let's get out of here, all this carry on. Having his hair cut, he'd throw up in the, he'd be sick in the barbers, for example, you know, he'd get that upset by the noise of the shaver or the scissors.
Blake was diagnosed fairly early, and when we'd gone through all the tests and finally they came to me and said, you know, we think your child's autistic. The good news is we think it's Asperger syndrome, and I just was in shock.
Honestly, our first reaction was just one of shock.
In many different ways. I think that when you first get a diagnosis, you go through a grieving process.
Mary did a lot of the research for the diagnosis. She would get on the internet and she knew something was wrong with Juan.
If a parent suspects their child has autism, probably the best thing they can do is go to their primary care physician and express their concerns. Now there are some screening tools that pediatricians can do to say, you know, is the child at risk for a diagnosis or not. Parents should also not take no, he doesn't have autism for an answer. You know, a lot of times pediatricians will say, well, he's a boy, you know, boys talk later, don't worry about it. You know, if you're concerned, I would keep pushing and keep pushing, and then get a referral to a specialist in autism as young as possible.
I think for a while, my husband and I were at loggerheads over how to deal with Lee because this was before he was diagnosed. Our son wasn't diagnosed with Asperger syndrome until he was 14.
Well, I have a daughter, Phoebe, who's in 6th grade at Station, and she was diagnosed almost 2 years ago with Asperger syndrome. And basically, Asperger's is characterized by difficulties with social interaction, which, as you can imagine, having a 6th grade girl, that poses a lot of challenges both for Phoebe and for me and my husband. Even before she was diagnosed, he has always had trouble with making friends, having conversations, not knowing always how to act in a social setting. And for people that don't know that she has this diagnosis, they misunderstand. They think that Phoebe's trying to annoy them, Phoebe's trying to be hurtful, or Phoebe is quote unquote weird or quirky. And for a parent, it's hard to watch your child go through that. It's hard to see them be rejected. It's hard to see them not have many friends at all. And along with the Asperger's, Phoebe often, this is the case for many children that have this, there's anxiety that goes along with that. So the more she gets rejected or people make fun of her in a social situation, the anxiety ramps up and it makes it a lot more difficult.
Thank you, Gabrielle, for being a patient teacher, for teaching me what happiness really is. You taught me that happiness is just being simple. And it's not hard to be simple.
This is the Mark Hutten Show. We'll take a brief break, and we're going to come back and start answering your questions. Thank you. To the Mark Hutten Show, and we have our first question here. A very simple, straightforward question. This is a teacher, and she's wanting to know if I have any tips to help her with her one and only Asperger's student. Because of their ability to focus in on one area of interest, Asperger's children can make very good students. However, their ability to focus can also be their weakness. The Asperger's child, for example, may be an expert at history, but will study that subject to the exclusion of everything else. So it'll be up to you to help the Asperger's child to broaden his interest. It helps if you can find a tie-in from the subject of the child's interest to the subject at hand. For example, let's say you have a student who is a history buff, and you need him to get on board with math. So it might help to give him some historical information related to math. You could, for example, introduce him to some of the greatest mathematical minds of all time, and then go from there to some of the mathematical concepts that they used or invented. So bear in mind that Asperger's children do tend to be very hyper-focused on just one or two subjects. So it'll be a challenge for you to figure out what they like and then tie that in to the new subject that you would like to get them interested in. Just a very brief 30-second break, and we'll be right back. Got a email from a parent the other day, Julie, and she's wanted to know if there is a difference between an Asperger's meltdown and a temper tantrum. And the short answer to that is yes, there is. We'll look at the temper tantrums first, and we'll compare the two. A tantrum is very straightforward. A child doesn't get his way, and as Grandma would say, he pitches a fit. Now, this isn't to discount the tantrum. They're not fun for anyone, but tantrums do have several qualities that distinguish them from meltdowns. A child who's having a tantrum will, for example, occasionally look around to see if his behavior is getting a reaction. He'll take precautions to be sure that he doesn't get hurt. He will attempt to use the social situation to his benefit, and a temper tantrum is thrown to achieve a specific goal. And once that goal is met, things return to normal. Now, when you're experiencing a tantrum from your child, you may often get the feeling that he is the one that's in control, although he would like for you to think that he's not in control. And again, when the situation is resolved, the temper tantrum will end as suddenly as it begins. So if you feel like you're being manipulated by a tantrum, you're right, you are. A tantrum is nothing more than a power play by a child who's not mature enough to play the subtle game of internal politics. So hold your ground and remember who's in charge. A tantrum in a child who does not have Asperger's is very simple to handle. Parents should simply ignore the behavior and refuse to give the child what he's demanding. Tantrums usually result when a child makes a request or a demand, the parent says no, and then the child has a temper tantrum as a last-ditch effort. Now, let's look at meltdowns. The problem with meltdowns is that there is a total loss of control. Something overtakes the child, and he needs for you to recognize this behavior and rein him back in because he's not able to gain control of himself. Child having a tantrum, he can gain control of himself if he wants to. An Asperger's child having a meltdown cannot regain control. So when he's in the middle of a meltdown, he desperately needs help gaining control. A child who is having a meltdown, he has no interest or involvement in the social situation. He is not, he doesn't care about his safety or the safety of others. He does not look around or care if those around him are reacting to his behavior, and the meltdown will usually continue as if it were moving under its own power, and it will wind down very slowly. So meltdowns can leave even very experienced parents at their wits' end, unsure of what to do. So when you think of a tantrum, the classic image is of a child lying on the floor, kicking his feet, swinging his arms, doing a lot of screaming. This is not even close to a meltdown. A meltdown is best defined as a total loss of behavior control. It is loud, risky at times, frustrating, and can be very exhausting. Meltdowns are also preceded by what I refer to as silent seizures. So ask yourself, does the meltdown have a brief period before onset where your child spaces out? And does it seem like he has a few minutes of time when he's totally uninvolved with his environment? So if you're noticing these silent seizures, that's the time to get into prevention mode, because meltdowns are very difficult to control once they've once they're underway. So when you're dealing with meltdowns, it's best to think in terms of prevention. When your child launches into a meltdown, you also want to remove him from the environment because it can be very dangerous. Glass shelving, windows, doors, they may become the target of an angry foot. So avoiding injury is the top priority with a meltdown. Another cause of meltdowns can be health issues. For example, if your child suffers from migraines, a migraine may hit your child very suddenly, and the pain is so totally debilitating that his behavior may spiral downward quickly, resulting in a meltdown. So again, thinking in terms of prevention, watch for telltale signs such as sensitivity to light, sensitivity to sound, if your child is holding his head, and so forth. So, Julie, thank you for your question, and I hope that answers your question regarding is there a difference between Asperger's, meltdowns, and tantrums. Thank you. Let's jump on to our next question. This is a question from another teacher. She has 2 students in her class with Asperger's, and she says that these 2 students have poor coordination, that is, not coordination, poor concentration, that is very reminiscent of her ADHD students, and she's wanting to know the reason for this. One reason for poor concentration is that Asperger's students tend to be easily distracted by internal stimuli. For example, they may be sitting there looking at the teacher as if they are paying attention, but in their mind, they're actually focusing on and fantasizing about their passion or their favorite subject. Another reason for poor concentration is these children tend to have problems sustaining focus on classroom activities. Now, often it's not that the attention is poor, but rather that the focus is odd. And what I mean by that is the Asperger's child can't figure out what is relevant, so his attention is focused on both relevant and irrelevant stimuli. In other words, sometimes he's paying attention to the points that the teacher is trying to get across. Other times he's paying attention to other things that have nothing to do with the lesson. Another reason for poor concentration is Asperger's kids tend to withdraw into complex inner worlds in a manner much more intense than is typical of daydreaming. And lastly, Asperger's kids tend to have difficulty learning in a group situation. Now, since parents are not in the classroom to help their Asperger's child, they should share information with their child's teachers, information that will help the teachers employ educational techniques specific to the Asperger's child. So that's what we'll look at next. Here are some suggestions that you, the parent of an Asperger's child, should share with your child's teachers. First of all, a tremendous amount of regimented external structure must be provided if the Asperger's student is going to be productive in the classroom. Assignments should be broken down into small units, and frequent teacher feedback and redirection should be offered. Asperger's students with severe concentration problems benefit from timed work sessions. This helps them to organize themselves. Classwork that is not completed within the time limit or classwork that's done carelessly should be made up during the child's own time. For example, during recess or during the time used for pursuit of special interests. Students with Asperger's can sometimes be very stubborn, so they need firm expectations and a structured program that teaches them that compliance with rules leads to positive reinforcement. This kind of program motivates the Asperger's child to be productive, thus enhancing self-esteem and lowering stress levels because the child sees himself as being competent. In the case of the mainstreamed student with Asperger's, poor concentration, slow clerical speed, and severe disorganization may make it necessary to lessen his homework load and lessen his classwork load, and also to provide time in a resource room where a special education teacher can provide the additional structure he needs to complete classwork and homework. Some Asperger students are so unable to concentrate in chaotic group environments that it places undue stress on parents to expect that they spend hours each night trying to get through homework with their Asperger's child. Also, the teacher should actively encourage the Asperger's child to leave his inner thoughts and fantasies behind and refocus on the real world. Now, this is going to be a constant battle because the comfort of that inner world is much more attractive than anything in real life to the Asperger's child. For many Asperger's students, students, even free play needs to be structured because they can become so immersed in solitary, ritualized fantasy play that they lose touch with reality. Encouraging the Asperger's child to play a board game with one or two others under close supervision not only structures play, but also offers an opportunity to practice social skills. So with these things in mind, the teacher should be able to make a few simple accommodations such that the Asperger's child can not only pay attention, but also pay attention for longer periods of time and focus on the relevant aspects of the lesson. Okay, thank you very much for that question. We're going to take just a little tiny 15-second break and we'll be right back with the next question. Okay, we've got another question from a parent, and she says, do we limit our child's time spent doing the activities that interest him most and run the risk that he'll withdraw even more? Or do we allow him unlimited access to his special activities, for example, video games, fantasy books, movies, and so on? It's important for parents to find the balance between accepting their child's unique interests and encouraging him to develop social skills and additional interests that might take him outside of his comfort zone. By granting unlimited access to video games and other fixations, parents are offering their child an easy way out such that he really never has to deal with the world or anybody in it. The special interests may be a convenient coping skill for facing the hardship of a long, difficult day at school, for example, but it won't be the healthiest path into adulthood. Asperger's children need to be challenged to explore other interests and find healthier coping skills. It's easy to use video games and other antisocial outlets to cope, but easier isn't usually better. If these children aren't encouraged and helped to develop social skills and independent living skills, there will be a direct impact on how many friends they have, how successful they are in school, and on the job later in life. Many Asperger's children may feel very comfortable engaging in their special activity in the short term, but that deep underlying desire to make friends or have a boyfriend or girlfriend someday will remain a source of constant dissatisfaction and further isolation. If you're the parent of a child with Asperger's or high-functioning autism, then you know that left to their own devices, these children would rather spend time with their favorite activity than doing anything else, including eating, sleeping, going to school, or even spending time with family. Think of your child's activity as a form of diet. Most parents would rather not have their child eat just peanut butter, for example. It would be good to throw in some vegetables and perhaps some liquids and protein and some fruit. And it's really no different with social skills. He's not developing any social skills necessarily while he's playing his video game, for example. And while video games are a good source of entertainment, and there's a lot of value to that, and we certainly don't want to throw the video games away, if that's the only thing in his diet, then we're going to run into trouble later in life. So, should your child have access to his special interests and activities? Yes, of course, but not to the exclusion of developing social skills that will be needed later in life. Just a very brief 30-second break, and we'll be right back. Next question is from Christy, and she's asking, are there a lot of similarities between Asperger's and ADHD? Well, the short answer to that would be yes. Asperger's and ADHD share some similarities that can make diagnosis very challenging. However, a close examination of their definitions reveals that the attention problems in Asperger's are quite different from ADHD symptoms. The fact that a child can have both Asperger's and ADHD further adds to the confusion. Roughly 60 to 70% of children with Asperger's also have symptoms which are compatible with an ADHD diagnosis. Now, here are some of the similarities between ADHD and Asperger's. Attention problems, irrationally energetic activity, learning problems. The child often appears to not be listening to someone during a conversation. There are problems following directions. The child may say inappropriate things and also may have problems figuring out the appropriate response to some situations. The child tends to talk at someone rather than with someone and may talk nonstop. Tantrums. And with some younger children, they tend to dislike being touched or held. Also, both Asperger's children and ADHD children have serious sensory integration problems. They can be uncoordinated and impulsive, and they both very much respond positively to structure and routine. Whenever there is a deficit in executive functions, it manifests itself in inattentiveness, distractibility, and impulsivity. 3 areas recognized on both the Asperger's and ADHD checklist of behaviors. So these are the similarities between ADHD and Asperger's. Now let's look at some of the differences. Asperger's focuses more on attention problems related to a need for strict routines, language difficulties, obsessive rituals, and self-stimulating behaviors. On the other hand, ADHD focuses more on attention problems related to impulsivity and hyperactivity. A child with Asperger's has the ability to focus on an activity of interest, whereas a child with ADHD does not. Great question, Christy. Thank you. And we will be back in 15 seconds. Okay, our next question comes from Candace, and she states, I have 1 child with Asperger's, 2 children who do not have it. How do I explain Asperger's to the neurotypical children? Explaining Asperger's or high-functioning autism isn't easy no matter who you're talking to. It's not something that can be described in a single sentence. And there are problems with explanations because you can't tell just by looking at someone whether or not they have Asperger's. Also, because the causes of Asperger's and high-functioning autism are yet to be clearly identified, it can sometimes be difficult convincing people that the condition actually exists. Having said that, you can try explaining to your children who do not have Asperger's that the Asperger's child basically has problems in 3 major areas of interest, and this is usually part of the criteria for diagnosing Asperger's. These 3 areas would be imagination, social understanding, and social communication. The first area is imagination. Now, this is the ability to think about things that aren't real. Kids with Asperger's tend not to be interested in games that involve pretending to be something else or to be someone else. For example, cops and robbers. Some children with Asperger's can be very interested in things that aren't interesting to other children, and also Asperger's kids can be very interested in activities that exclude social interaction. And they also may like collecting items that seem very dull or boring or unusual to others. Now, let's look at social understanding. This means knowing what to do when you're with other people. The children with Asperger's have difficulty understanding social relationships, and they don't understand all the social rules involved in communication and interpersonal relationships. As we grow up, we learn how to behave appropriately in certain situations. For example, we learn not to say things to people like, you look fat or you look old, unless we're deliberately trying to be hurtful. But a child with Asperger's may say something like this, even though he doesn't mean to be rude or hurtful. Now, sometimes it seems that he may say certain things and that he is trying to be hurtful, but he says these things because he simply doesn't understand the hidden social rules and the mechanics of friendship. Social communication. This means knowing what to say to other people and understanding the meaning of what they're saying to you. Just imagine how many times a day the basics of social communication come into your child's life. At the grocery store, at home, at school, etc. But children with Asperger's can have problems when talking to other people because they take things so literally. For example, if you say to your Asperger's child, I watched this movie last night and it was so funny I laughed my head off. He may become alarmed, believing that your head really did come off your body. So it can be very hard for children with Asperger's to understand when someone is joking around. This is often why the child may become angry or upset by something that you said that wasn't meant to be hurtful. Now, there will definitely be other things that come up that you will need to explain with respect to educating your neurotypical children about Asperger's, but this would be a good starting point for you. So I hope that answers your question, Candace, and I thank you for that question. We will be right back. last question now from Patricia, and she says, is there anything that I should be concerned about now that my Asperger's child is approaching adolescence? I'm a little concerned how he's going to make it as an adult. So is there anything that I can do now in preparation for that? Great question. Most parents with an Asperger's child tend to become a little concerned as this child approaches adolescence. But let me reassure you that children with Asperger's and high-functioning autism eventually go through adolescence on their way toward becoming strong, focused adults, regardless of the misinformation that you may have come across on the internet. Now, it's true that adolescence is a difficult time for all teenagers and that it can be especially difficult for Asperger's teens. But with the right education and support, many, if not all, Asperger's teens go on to graduate from high school or go to a technical school or learn some type of skill such that they're a valuable resource in the workplace. Oftentimes, a teenager with Asperger's or high-functioning autism fares best with one or two close friends with whom they can practice adolescent social skills and adult behaviors. Even one relatively close relationship can make the difference between a depressed, awkward teenager and one who is beginning to learn valuable social skills with a select few others. Parents and family may need to help facilitate relationships between their Asperger's teenager and other teens his own age, offering to have other teens overnight or taking their Asperger's teenager to an activity with one or two other acquaintances can help facilitate closer connections between their child and others his own age. Thanks for your question, Patricia. We are out of time for today. Thank you for listening, and we will see you again soon. If you have any questions, feel free to go to myaspergerschild.com, myaspergerschild.com. You'll see a link there with my email address, and feel free to ask whatever questions you have, and I can usually respond within 24 hours. Also, while you're over there at myaspergerschild.com, feel free to sign up for the free newsletter. This newsletter goes out twice a week, and I give you a bunch of good parenting skills that will help you with your child or teenager, or maybe your young adult who's still living at home. So until next time, this is Mark Hutten. Have a great week. We'll see you next time.